All right, thanks a lot, Mark. I'm here with Mr. Mercer. Mr. Mercer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Call me Rick, please.
Okay, Rick. So your book, Final Report, is it your fourth or fifth book
I
now?
guess it would be somewhere in there.
In there.
Some of the books that I released were updated, so sometimes I call them two, sometimes I call them one. But it's certainly the latest and the biggest and the best.
So what made you want to do the Final Report?
Well, obviously I did the Mercer Report for 15 years, and I wrapped up the show, so I thought it had a nice ring to it, kind of putting, wrapping it up in a bow. Also, I had published the rants in the past, and they were quite successful, but it had been a lot of years since I had published any rants, so there was about 5 or 6 years there of unpublished rants, and I wanted to create a record of 15 years of what I considered the best rants, and also memories of being on the road.
But it's not just the best rants. There's, as I was reading the bio there, it's stories that we haven't even heard before.
Sure. Some of them are stories about things that went wrong on the road. When comedians or journalists or, well, anyone really gets together and they talk about things they've done in their career, they very rarely talk about times where everything went well. They talk about the disasters. That's where the funny stories are. It's like, if you have a story about a job interview, the great one is not that great, but the bad one ends up eventually being a funny story. So a lot of things went wrong in 15 years. We crashed I flipped a car, we crashed a van, I crashed in a hot air balloon, we had an emergency crash landing in a helicopter. There were some pretty hairy flights over the Rockies. Like, lots of things went wrong. So there's lots of stories to tell.
Mm-hmm. Now, like you mentioned, you did the Mercer Report for 15 years. When you're going through this Final Report book and novel, what are some of the memories that flood back to you? Like, is it kind of nostalgic, or,
It is kind of nostalgic, especially seeing as I was on the road with the same people for 15 years. Like, literally, the exact same people. There was no turnover. No one left their job. So the same people who were there day one, and we didn't really know each other, they were standing there 15 years later. So there's a lot of memories there. It's like being in a band, except one that didn't break up. And so, yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia. And I know from talking to people on the street, people ask me about certain people that have been on the show. A lot of people want to talk to me about Jan Arden, who's a great friend of mine now, who was a regular on the show, even though the show never had regulars, but she was just such a spectacular guest. She kept coming back time and time again. Yeah, it's a bit of a walk down memory lane for sure.
Yeah. And so when you now it's been a year since the Mercer Report's been off the year.
Yeah, I would be halfway through a season, I guess, if I had continued with the show. Yeah.
And how's life outside of the television audience view?
Well, it's been busy. I still do live shows, and I always did live shows in the off season. Now I'm doing them in the regular TV season, which for me was always like the school year. And I've had this book, and so that's kind of put me back on the road. So I kind of feel like I'm on the road. Well, I am on the road, except I just don't have a TV camera with me, and I miss the guys I travel with. But so far, it hasn't really hit me that hard.
Speaking of which, you are on the tour and you're going to various book signings. What are some of the reactions and stories from the people that you go and visit at the signings?
That's been really nice because the show has been on for 15 years. So, it's one thing to meet someone who's 65 and they say, I've watched your show, and that's great. But then you meet someone who's a poli-sci graduate and they started watching the show when they were a kid, and they say, what got them interested in politics, and they're a grown man or woman, and they've watched the show for that long. And lots of families came out, which is amazing because we became a family show. So, if you're in show business and you connect with anyone, it's a bit cliche, you don't just connect with one person, it's an accomplishment, but it really means a lot. And for people to take time to come to the book signings, to get in the line and say a few words about what the show meant to them over the years, that's really nice. Also, I'm proud of the fact that we traveled to so many different places in the country and so many places off the beaten path, that so many places someone will come up to me and they'll say, you were in my hometown. And that means a lot to people. Not because it's me, but because we were a big national show, and we would come to small towns, and we would make them look like rock stars. That was our philosophy. We only celebrated. If we were coming to your town, We were there to show people that it was a great place to live and to find great stories. And I think that meant a lot to people.
Yeah. Well, I just said that. I mean, you came visit my hometown, Ontario, which, kind of shocked me. I was away and everything, but I would have liked to have seen there. Now, the book is done. It's on for sale now. How much actual work went into it? And are there any more stories that you'd like to include in it or that didn't make the cut or anything?
I joke that I just hit select all and print, and that's how I wrote a book. But I had to go back over all the rants. So it's over 250. And there's 250 shows, and that means there's well over 500 segments. And so all that had to be looked at and considered. And the memories and the stories that I write, because there's a lot of original material stories about, shooting with Pierre Burton, stories about crashing in the helicopter. There's these stories, and that took a bit of work because it's a learning curve for me. I've written sitcoms, I've written sketch, I've written stand-up, I've written rants, obviously, I've written my show, but I've never really sat down and wrote that kind of memoir-esque anecdotes. And it was a learning curve, but I really enjoyed it. And now that I'm done, and the book is published, obviously my deadline was quite a while ago, I'm constantly thinking of, I should have wrote that story, or here's another story I could have told. And there's hopefully another book there, but we'll see.
When you now you're still performing, but is writing something that you are passionate about? Is that something that you like? Yeah. When you came up with the first book, was it kind of like, might as well do, or do you actually really enjoy?
I've always enjoyed that very much, and that's kind of how I started. I was one of those people who was dragged kicking and screaming to the stage by a drama teacher because we were writing a show, and I agreed to get involved in the writing because I was really intrigued by the writing. And then she kind of dragged me up onto the stage, and then I got my first laugh, and then of course it was all history. But I like writing very much. When you're acting, you're relying on even in a one-person show, you're relying on a whole apparatus. You've got cameras, and you've got crews, and you've got directors, and you've got other actors, and you have to be the producer. There's a lot that you need to practice that art or that activity. Whereas writing, you can just do it, and you don't need any of that, and you can do it anywhere, and that's pretty exciting and appealing to me right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we'd like to thank you for joining us today here on Discover Now, and people can pick up your book where?
They can pick it up anywhere where books are sold.
And online, of course.
Or online, of course. Any Google search will send you exactly to the right place.
All right, thank you
Thanks
very
much.
much.
I hope people read it. I think it's a fun read.
I look forward to it. It's going to be great.
Thanks.
Back to you, Mark.